She was 25 years old and owed £11 in back wages. The chain went around the gate at 8:30 on a wet Tuesday in November, and Edwin Harcourt stood clear of the puddles in his polished shoes and told the creditor's men that this girl had ruined his plate works. One of them laughed. No wages, no reference, no lodging past Saturday, no name the Birmingham trade would repeat kindly. What she owned was one small brass batch stamp, worn smooth at the handle, that had belonged to her dead father. Within the week, in place of those £11, they handed her the building. Then Isaac Fenner came through the gate with a glass negative in black paper. 11 plates from that box had failed. This one held a horse in the air above a white rail, sharp to the hairs of its mane. The wrapper carried her own handwriting, 47, letter C. But what Edwin Harcourt did not know was that the answer was still inside the rooms he had just locked. First floor, third cupboard along the wall, in the dark beside an old warm flue. If you have ever been blamed out loud for work you did correctly, say so in the comments. I would like to know how many of us there are. The place was called the Harcourt Photographic Plate Rooms, and until the middle of October it had employed 9 people in a lane off Great Hampton Street in Hockley, where the brass trade put a grit in the air that got into the tea. It made dry plates, which is coated glass sold in boxes that a photographer could carry out to a job, expose, and develop a week later at his own convenience. That was the new trade in 1881, and it was worth real money to anybody who could make plates that behaved the same way twice. Harcourt's plates had stopped behaving. In 6 weeks, 412 boxes came back from studios in Birmingham and as far out as Wolverhampton. Some wanted exposures so long that a sitter's face blurred from breathing. Others came up out of the developer with a gray veil laid over them. Every letter out of that office over Harcourt's signature said the same thing in careful words. The coding had been badly done. The coder was a woman named Ruth Mercer, and she had been removed from the work. Nobody in the trade asked the only question that mattered. Out of all those returned boxes, why had one small run of 24 plates, marked 47 and the letter C, done what nothing else in the building could do? The answer never left the building. Ruth Mercer had been raised on glass the way other children are raised on scripture, and everything she knew how to do well was work no customer ever saw. Her father was Thomas Mercer, a traveling wet plate photographer who worked the fairs and the market towns out of a cart with a black tent lashed across the back of it. From the age of 9, Ruth cleaned his glass. She learned that a plate with grease on it will take an image and hand it back spoiled, and that the grease usually came off her own thumb until she learned better. At 16, she was doing most of the work while he talked to the customers, because talking to customers was the part he was good at. One wet night outside Dudley, they lost a whole afternoon sitting because 2 plates got mixed, and neither of them could say which family belonged to which. Her father sat on the tail of the cart afterward with a small brass stamp in his hand, the sort used for numbering crates, and he put it into hers. "Number everything, Ruth," he said. "A thing you cannot find twice never happened." He died in the spring of 1878 of a chill that turned into something worse inside 9 days. The cart and the camera went to a man in Stourbridge who held 2 of his notes. Ruth kept the stamp because nobody thought it worth putting on the list. She came to the Harcourt rooms in the summer of 1880 at 14 shillings a week, which was 3 shillings more than the packing girls got and 9 shillings less than any man on the floor. The work suited her. On the first floor, under a red lamp, she made the gelatin emulsion in a covered vessel that stood in a bath of warm water, and when it was ready, she washed it and filtered it and poured it along glass on a long table and spread it even. The coated plates went into wooden cupboards to dry in the dark, and they had to dry in real dark because a plate that is even a little awake to light will spoil itself long before a photographer gets his hands on it. In the daylight, she cut and washed and inspected, and she kept a book. Every batch took a number from the brass stamp, and beside it she wrote the date, the vessel, the cupboard, and anything out of the ordinary in a pencil hand that Mulhale said looked like ants. Edwin Harcourt was 41 and had come into the trade from the wholesale side of it. He did not go upstairs if he could avoid it, because the emulsion room smelled of gelatin, and gelatin smells like something left too long in a warm room. He called the book a useless habit. He said it twice where the packing girls could hear, and the second time one of them laughed, and that was the sort of thing Ruth kept. In September, he took an order from a warehouse in Sheffield for 600 dozen plates across the winter, at a price he had worked out on the back of somebody else's letter. To meet it, he wanted 4 batches a day, where the rooms had been making 2. He told her to cut the standing time on the emulsion, because standing time was an hour in which nobody was making anything. He bought 200 weight of second-hand glass from a stock dealer in Smethwick without asking her to look at it first. Ruth told him on the stairs, with nobody there to hear it, that plates made that way would come out slow and that a good many of them would come out veiled. He said he had been in this trade 5 years and had never once heard of a plate being slow because a man was in a hurry. The first 2 boxes came back in the last week of September from a studio in Aston, with a note saying the plates would not do for children because no child on earth would hold still that long. Harcourt wrote back that the fault lay in the photographer's lens. In the second week of October, 11 more came back, and after that the returns went straight into the office and the office door was kept shut. She knew anyway. Eliza Darby, 20, who did the packing and had a memory like a ledger, counted them in the passage for her. 19 by the Friday, 31 by the Monday after. Harcourt dealt with it in writing, which was the thing he did best. Ruth saw one of his letters because Eliza had been asked to copy an address onto the envelope. It said the fault had been traced to the coding operative, and that the operative had been removed. She had not been removed yet. She was removed on the 17th of October, in the packing room, in front of Moll and Eliza, and a buyer from a Wolverhampton house who had come down to see whether anything could be got out of the wreck. Harcourt did the talking, in the voice he kept for customers. He said a great deal of trust had been placed in somebody who had turned out not to deserve it. The buyer looked at his own boots. Moll Hales, 31, who had cut and washed glass for 11 years, and had told Harcourt to his face what she thought of the Smethwick stock, was let go the same afternoon. There were no wages that week, and none the week after. By the 4th of November, the creditors had moved. 2 men from a firm of accountants in Temple Row came down the lane with a chain and a padlock, and Harcourt met them in the courtyard and stayed on the dry stones by the door. What Ruth was owed came to £11 2 shillings, counting the 4 weeks unpaid in the notice she never got. There was no money in the business to pay it with. What the business had was a lease with 14 months left to run at £7 10 shillings a quarter, a repairing covenant that made the tenant answerable for the roof, and a floor of plant the accountants valued at nothing. The offer was put to her in an office on Colmore Row by a solicitor's clerk named Percy Nail, 24, who read it out twice because he could see she was reading it herself. She could take the lease and everything standing inside the building in full settlement of the £11 2 shillings. She understood exactly what she was being handed. Rent fell due at Christmas and the roof was hers. If she signed, she was not being paid. She was being made answerable for a building that 4 men in good coats wanted off their books before quarter day, and they wanted it off badly enough to give it to a coder. Harcourt was in the outer office when she came out. He said she was welcome to the book as well, since she set such store by it. She signed on the 8th of November with a pen that spattered. The work stood on the north side of the lane, a narrow front of blackened brick 3 floors high, with a short chimney and a yard behind it about 20 feet by 14, paved in blue brick. One side of the yard was a lime-washed wall, gone the color of weak tea. Ruth had looked at that wall for 2 years without much interest in it. It faced the right way, and it took the light evenly all morning. She went in on the 10th with Moll and Eliza. A broom, 2 buckets, and a lantern that Moll would not let anybody carry lit above the ground floor. The ground floor was washing and cutting and packing. 2 lead-line troughs under the window, a cutting bench with a bed of felt on it, shelves of cardboard boxes, reels of black paper, a paste pot furred over hard. The first floor was the emulsion room. 9 feet of coating table down the middle, the copper warming bath in a brick surround at the far end, scales and filters and 4 emulsion vessels, and along the east wall 3 tall wooden drying cupboards with the letters A, B, and C painted on their doors. The windows were glazed with ruby glass and 2 panes were cracked. The top floor was a testing studio under north glazing, and it held a camera with a simple drop shutter, 3 dark slides, and about a 1/4 inch of dust. Ruth paid Moll and Eliza 8 pence a day out of the £2 11 shillings she had in the world and told them plainly it would run out in 3 weeks. Moll said she had been paid worse for stupider work. Eliza said nothing and went on sweeping because Eliza had spent a year being afraid of Edwin Harcourt and had not finished with it yet. They cleaned for 4 days. They carried out 1,100 sheets of glass and sorted it against the light, and Moll threw away nearly a third, calling out the fault in a flat voice while Eliza kept the count. Warped, chipped, greasy. A hair crack, corner to corner you could not see unless you tipped it. On the second morning, Ruth opened the 3 drying cupboards and stood looking at them a long while. They were not the same. Cupboard A had a door that had warped in the middle and no longer sat square in its frame. Cupboard B had a hole where a pipe had once gone through the side, stuffed with a rag. Cupboard C stood in the corner with its back against the old chimney breast, and its door had been made by somebody who cared, close-fitting, with a strip of felt let into the edge. So they did the one test that cost nothing. All three went into the emulsion room at 11 in the morning, shut the door, put out the lamp, and sat on the floor for 20 minutes, waiting for the dark to stop being dark. After a quarter of an hour, Moll said, "There it is." Along the top edge of Cupboard A's door was a thin gray line of daylight, and along the hinge side another. Cupboard B showed a soft glow where the rag had gone slack in the pipe hole. Cupboard C showed nothing at all. Ruth put her face against the crack of its door and could not tell whether her own eyes were open. The brick at the back of Cupboard C was warm to the hand. Behind it ran an old flue from a workshop that had used the building before the plate rooms took it, and though nothing had burned in that grate for years, the flue carried heat across from the chimney of the stamping shop next door. The same boiler fed steam through a pipe into the copper warming bath, on an arrangement Harcourt had got cheap, and the pressure in that pipe rose and fell all day, according to what the men next door were doing. Ruth wrote all of it down. Cupboard A leaks at the top in the hinge. Cupboard B leaks at the pipe hole. Cupboard C is tight, and the back wall is warm. She did not know yet what any of it meant, so that is where it stands. 412 returned boxes, a locked gate, and 24 plates that did what nothing else in the building could do. If you think you know already, say so in the comments before she gets there. Then stay with me, because the first thing she did was take a plane to a table. The coating table was 9 feet of pine on 4 legs, and it was not level. Ruth had known that for 2 years, because a coated plate tells you the truth about a table within about 4 seconds. She borrowed a spirit level from John Dace, 48, a millwright 2 doors down who charged her nothing for the loan and 3 pence for a washer she had not asked him for. The table fell away 3/16 of an inch across its length, and it had a hollow near the middle where somebody had leaned on it for years. She took the top off, planed the hollow out over 2 days, set it back, and shimmed the 2 low legs with slips of oak. Then she wetted the surface and watched where the water wanted to go, and shimmed again. On the 4th pass, the water lay still. Then she made a batch, 12 half plates, made the way she had made them in her first year at the works, before anybody was in a hurry, with the emulsion standing its full time in the warm bath, and the glass cleaned twice, and never touched anywhere but the edges. She coated it slowly. It was the best coating she had done in her life, and she knew it while she was doing it, the way a person knows when a seam is running straight. The plates dried 3 days in Cupboard C, because Cupboard C was the only one she trusted. She marked them with the brass stamp in the letter, then took 2 up to the top floor and photographed a sheet of printed paper pinned to the yard wall in flat November light. At 1 second, 2, 4, and 8. At 8 seconds, the print was readable. At 4, it was gray, and at 2, there was nothing on the plate you could call an image. She developed the last of them at 9 at night, with her hands cold, and then sat down on a box in the packing room and stayed there. On the shelf behind her was a plate of Isaac Fenner's, made in that same building out of the same kind of glass, that had stopped a horse in the air with a drop shutter. Isaac Fenner came on the Thursday. He was 46 and had a portrait studio on Bull Street with his own name over the door in gold. 11 of his 12 plates from that box had been useless, and he wanted to know why the 12th was not. He brought a friend with him, a man who had to stop halfway up the stairs and stand with a hand on the rail until his chest settled. That was Dr. Elias Webb, 59, who had lectured in chemistry at a college in Bristol until his lungs made him stop. He sat down on the only chair in the emulsion room and did not get up again for 2 hours. He knew what Charles Bennett had shown 3 years earlier, that gelatin emulsion held warm for a long while came out far more sensitive than emulsion hurried. He said also that a good many men in the trade had read the same thing and could not make it come right twice running, and that a process nobody can repeat is an accident. Ruth told him what she had done. The table, the glass, the 12 plates, the 8 seconds. He asked her one question, and it opened the whole thing, though it took another month and a good deal of wasted silver before either of them understood what he had asked. "What happened to those plates?" he said, before they went into the cupboard. She did not have an answer, so she went and looked for one. Her own book had survived because it lived in her apron. Harcourt's book, the fair copy kept downstairs, had lost pages. Somewhere between the 17th of October and the 4th of November, the leaves covering the last 10 days of September had been cut out close to the stitching with a penknife, and Ruth had a fair idea whose knife, though she never proved it and never said it aloud to anyone but Moll. What she had left was her own pencil hand and about 200 wrappers. She walked the wrappers up herself. She took the paper out of Isaac's return boxes and went to a studio in Aston, and to a man in Handsworth who did commercial work for the jewelers, and to a widow named Mrs. Sarah Kite, 55, who kept a shop in Villa Street selling frames and albums and had taken 4 boxes on sale or return and never sold one. Mrs. Kite gave her tea and talked 20 minutes about her son in Canada, who had gone out in '74 and wrote at Christmas, and Ruth listened to all of it and carried the wrappers home in her shawl. Then she laid them out on the packing bench in number order, from batch 39 to batch 53, with the reports beside them. The pattern was there once the paper was in front of her. Every batch was slow, and every batch from the second week of September onward had veiling in it somewhere. Batch 47 was slow and veiled too, in 2 of its 3 parts. The plates from it that had dried in cupboard A came back fogged. The plates from it that had dried in cupboard B were no better. The 2 dozen from that same batch that had dried in cupboard C were clean and fast, and they were the only plates out of 6 weeks of work that anybody had written a good word about. The same emulsion, the same glass, the same day, 3 cupboards. At the bottom of the day's tally for the 29th of September, in the margin, in her own writing, were 2 words she had no memory of putting there. 47 waiting. She showed it to Eliza, and Eliza did what Eliza did, which was to stand still with her eyes somewhere else for a moment and then give it back complete. That was the day the steam went off, Eliza said. The men next door were at their boiler, and the pressure came down before dinner and did not come up till the afternoon, and you were downstairs the whole time over the new glass. The vessel sat in the bath. It sat there from before 12 till gone 4, and then you came up and coated it in a hurry, and we were racking plates at 8 o'clock at night. Ruth wrote it in the book. Batch 47, 29th September, vessel 2, held in bath from before noon until after 4, steam low. And then she drew exactly the wrong conclusion, and it cost her 19 days. The 4 hours meant nothing to her. 4 hours in a bath with the steam off sounded like an accident and a nuisance. Half a day wasted while she argued about glass. What stood out was the cupboard. 1 batch split 3 ways, and only the part that went into the tight, dark, warm cupboard had come out worth anything. She had sat in that room in the dark and watched daylight come in around 2 doors and not the 3rd. Cupboard C was warm at the back and shut like a box, and everything good in 6 weeks had come out of it. Dr. Webb said she might be right, and that he would rather she proved it than believed it. She took it for a man being cautious with a woman, and went ahead. She made a batch the ordinary way, the way Harcourt had wanted it made, with short standing time in the bath. She cleaned the glass to her own standard, coated it on the level table, and dried every plate of it in cupboard C. If the cupboard was the thing, this would show it. The plates came out beautiful. Even clear, not a speck of veiling on any of the 18. Under the ruby lamp, they looked like the best work in Birmingham. They needed 6 seconds against the yard wall. She did it again with a fire in the old grate to make the cupboard warmer, and dried 12 plates in the heat of it. 4 frilled at the edges where the gelatin lifted, 1 crazed clean across, and the 7 that survived wanted 5 seconds. The silver in that batch cost 4 shillings and 3 pence, which was 2 days of Moll's wages and most of a week of coal. Moll asked her on the stairs what the fire was for. Ruth said it was for the drying and did not explain further, and Moll went back down without another word. It was the second time that month Ruth had kept a thing to herself that would have been better said out loud, and she did it because she had spent her whole working life watching what happened to information once it left her hands. Dr. Webb came on the 2nd of December and would not go upstairs. He sat in the packing room with a rug over his knees and had her bring the book down. He put 2 sheets of paper on the bench side by side. On the left, he made her write out, in order, every single thing that had happened to batch 47, from the glass being cut to the plates coming out of the cupboard. On the right, the same list for the batch she had just ruined with the fire. Then he told her to strike out every line that appeared on both. Glass cut and washed. Struck out, emulsion made. Struck out, coated on a level table. Struck out, dried in cupboard C, in the dark, against a warm wall. Struck out hard, because she had made certain of that one twice. What was left standing on the left-hand sheet, with no partner on the right, was 1 line in her own pencil. Held in bath from before noon until after 4. She looked at it for a while, and then she said that she had wasted 19 days. Dr. Webb said 19 days was cheap for it, and that men with laboratories had wasted years on the same error, which is to take the last thing that happened for the cause of it. The cupboard had done something real. It kept the plates in the dark while they dried, which was why the other two parts of batch 47 had come back fogged. But a cupboard can only keep what is already there. Whatever made those plates quick had been put into them upstairs, in a copper tank, while she was downstairs quarreling about glass. Then he told her that the only way to know was to change one thing at a time, and to change nothing else, and to write down the times. The first thing she did was throw away the steam. The pipe from the stamping shop was the reason nobody in that building had ever held the bath steady for an hour together. She had it capped. In its place, she set the copper tank over a small iron stove with a flat top, bought a dairy thermometer from a man in the bull ring for 2 shillings and 9 pence, and learned the stove, which took 4 days. How much slack it wanted to hold steady, how long it took to come up, how far it ran on before it began to climb. She wrote all of that on the wall in pencil, and it is the least interesting page of the whole story, and the one that made the rest possible. Then, in the second week of December, she made 3 batches. They were small, 9 plates each, out of the same night's emulsion, split 3 ways and set into the same bath at the same time. The glass came off the same sheet. The coating was done on the same table within an hour. All 27 dried side by side in cupboard C. The only difference was how long each vessel stood in the warm bath before she took it out. The first came out early. The second stood a good while longer at a steady, moderate warmth, near enough to what she had reconstructed for batch 47. The third she left in a long time past that, and warmer, because she wanted to see the other end of it, and because part of her still believed, after 3 weeks of failure, that more of a good thing must be better. She coated on the Thursday. They dried until Sunday. On the Monday morning, she took 3 plates, 1 from each batch, up to the top floor and photographed the yard wall. The first batch wanted 5 seconds, and it was clean and useless. The second gave her a printed page at half a second, and then, when she fitted the drop shutter to the old camera and let it fall, gave her the yard wall and the doorway, and Moll standing in it with her arms folded, in the time it takes a piece of wood to fall 8 inches. The third came up out of the developer gray all over, before it had seen anything at all, fogged in the making. There is a point past which warmth stops making a plate sensitive to light and starts making it sensitive to nothing in particular. And Ruth found that point on a Monday morning in December with 9 plates and a pencil. She sat on the top floor with the 3 wet plates in front of her on the table. It was never one thing. It was 4, and every one of them had to be right at the same time. Emulsion held warm, steadily, for the right length of time and not longer. Glass clean enough that nothing sat on it, coating even, on a table that did not lie. Drying in the dark, in a cupboard that shut like cupboard C. Take away any one, and you had a bad plate. Batch 47 had got all 4 by accident in 1/3 of itself, and 3 out of 4 in the rest. And that was the whole of the mystery that closed a factory, put 9 people out of work, and cost her £11 2 shillings. She wrote the middle process out on 4 sides of paper, in plain words, with the times and the thermometer readings, and she wrote it so Moll could follow it, which meant she stopped writing it for herself. That was the change in her, and it was worth more than the process. Moll Hales could read, but a page of it took her a long while, and she hated being watched doing it. So Ruth cut symbols into the ends of the plate racks with a knife, 1 notch for the first stage, 2 for the second, a cross for a batch not to be trusted, and painted the times on a board over the stove in figures 4 inches high. After that, anybody could walk into that room and know where a batch stood without asking her. They made the first proper run in the 3rd week of December. 24 half plates, all 4 conditions right, dried 4 days in cupboard C, inspected 1 at a time against the ruby lamp, packed in black paper. Ruth took the brass stamp and put a number on every box. Mercer, batch M1. She kept 2 plates back on the shelf in the packing room, wrapped and labeled with the date, and started a practice she never afterward broke. 1 plate out of every batch went on that shelf and was not sold. She called them control plates. Moll called them the shelf. Eliza kept them in date order, and in May, they were the reason the whole business survived. Isaac Fenner took 6 plates out of Mercer batch M1 on the 4th of January and did not order anything. He said he had a studio with his own name on it and 40 years behind that name, and that he had already told 11 customers in October that a plate had failed him and would not say it again on the strength of 1 good box and a woman's word. He said he would test them properly. Then he did nothing with them for a fortnight, which nearly finished Ruth's nerve. When he did it, he was thorough. He exposed 2 plates on the same sitter in the same chair on 2 days a week apart, against 2 of the brand he had been buying since the spring. He exposed one on a child of 4 who would not sit still, at the shortest exposure he dared. He kept the last 2 in a drawer and did not touch them. On the 22nd of February, he came down the lane with an order for 6 dozen half plates at 8 shillings the dozen and a condition on the bottom of it in his own hand. If the plates delivered were not the equal of the plates tested, the order was cancelled, and he would say so to anybody who asked. £2 8 shillings. Ruth stood in the yard and read it 3 times. Then she put people back on the floor. Moll Hales at 12 shillings a week, a shilling more than Harcourt had ever paid her. Eliza Darby at 9. Bridget Nolan, 34, who had washed glass at a mirror, works in Aston until it's shut, at 10 shillings. Alfred Tanner, 15, for the buckets and the carrying, at 4 shillings and his dinner. Ruth wrote the sums on the flyleaf of the receipt book in pencil on the 23rd of February, and beside her own name, she wrote nothing and left the line blank for 11 weeks. 6 dozen plates is 72 pieces of glass that must all be right, and it is a different animal from 24. Every sheet came off the cutting bench, went through 2 troughs, drained in a rack, and was held to the window by Moll before it went upstairs. And Moll threw out 9 sheets in the first week for grease alone. The emulsion was made at night because Ruth wanted the room to herself and the stove steady. Eliza notched the racks. Ruth wrote the times in the book. They worked late through the first week of March, and it was Eliza who noticed the light. She was carrying a rack of coated plates across the emulsion room at about 5:10, in the dark, and she stopped because there was a thin, bright line lying across the floor and up the side of the coating table. It came down out of the roof, glazing above the landing, full of dust turning over slowly, and it was there perhaps 20 minutes, and then it was gone. Eliza said, "There's a light in here." Ruth said the roof glazing faced north and the sun did not come in that way, and that in any case the plates went straight from the table into the cupboard. She was wrong about the first thing and right about the second, and being right about the second is what kept it hidden another 5 weeks. The 6 dozen went out on the 14th of March. Isaac used them, and on the 28th, he asked for 6 dozen more and a dozen quarter plates, and mentioned that a photographer named Charles Ruddock had been asking him where he got them. They started the second run on the 3rd of April. It was the largest making the works had done, 84 plates coated against an order for 72, and it took the last of the silver she had bought on credit and 9/10 of the money in the tin. 61 of those 84 came out fogged. She found it on the Saturday morning, plate after plate coming up gray, with nothing on them worth keeping. She went through all 84 in the ruby light, set aside the 23 that were clean, and then sat on the floor of the packing room with her back against the shelf and worked out what she owed against what she had, which took less time than she wanted. She thought she knew what she had done. She thought she had held the emulsion too long in the bath, because that was the failure she had seen in December, gray all over, fogged in the making. So she made a small batch with a shorter hold, and it fogged. She made another shorter still, so short she knew it would be slow, and it was slow and fogged as well. She had Alfred scour every vessel with fresh sand and Bridget wash the glass a 3rd time. None of it made the smallest difference, and by the 11th of April she had lost 8 days and had 11 shillings and 4 pence and an order she could not fill. Isaac came down on the 12th and said he would hold the order a fortnight and no longer, and that he was sorry, and that he had a studio to run. It was Moll who saw it, and she saw it because she had spent 11 years looking at glass and not at chemistry. She was carrying 6 of the ruined plates across the packing room to be cleaned off and used again, holding them flat to the window out of habit, and she stopped and said, "This isn't the same on all of them." Ruth said fog was fog. Moll said it was not, laid the 6 in a row on the bench, and made her look. The gray did not lie evenly like a breath on a window. It ran across each plate from one corner toward the other, wider at one end, with an edge you could put a finger along. A band. Ruth stood over that bench a full minute. Then she fetched all 61 and laid them out in the order they had been racked, which she could do because Eliza remembered the order and the racks were notched. The band moved. On the plates racked first, it lay along the top corner. 20 plates further on it had crossed to the middle. On the last of them it was down at the bottom edge and thin, and on the final 4 there was nothing at all. Something with an edge had walked across that rack, slowly, in a room that was supposed to be dark. They went up at 5 o'clock on the 13th of April, all 4 of them, and shut the door and put out the lamp and waited. At 18 minutes past 5, a line of daylight came down through the glazing over the landing, about the width of a knitting needle, and lay across the racking bench where coated plates stood before they went into the cupboard. It moved as the sun went. In the last week of March, it would have been low and short and gone in 10 minutes. By the middle of April, in the clear weather they had been having, it lay on that bench the best part of half an hour. The glazing faced north, and north lights do not take the sun. But at the end of a long April evening, the sun goes far enough round to the northwest to come in at a flat angle, and there was a crack 5 inches long in the fourth pane from the wall, where something had come down on the glass and the putty had gone hard and dropped away along the line of it. Ruth had walked under that pane 400 times. Samuel Peach, 36, a glazier out of Icknield Street, set a new pane and bedded it properly for 2 shillings and 4 pence, which left her 9 shillings. Mole pasted black paper over that frame on the inside and over the 2 either side of it. They moved the racking bench 4 feet to the north wall. After that, there was a rule in the works that no coated plate stood in the open in that room, lit or unlit, longer than it took to carry it to the cupboard. The next run of 72 came out with 2 rejects. Edwin Harcourt had not gone away. He had taken a position in the new year as agent for a plate maker in Manchester, which gave him a card and a reason to be in every studio in the district. The first Ruth knew of it was on the 18th of April, when Tyler and Sons, chemical merchants of Snow Hill, who had let her have silver on 30 days since January, wrote to say they wanted cash with order in future. She went down and asked why. The man there was decent enough to be embarrassed and said only that it had been put to him that the account was a risk and that the party who put it to him bought a good deal more from the firm than she did. The second thing was a letter saying that the process notes and batch records made during her employment at the Harcourt photographic plate rooms remained the property of that business and that her continued use of them would be resisted. Percy Nail read it over and said the notes were in her own hand in a book she had carried in her own apron, that the business named had been wound up in November, and that the letter was written to frighten her. He charged 1 shilling and 6 pence and told her to keep the envelope. The third thing was worse because it was clever. Harcourt began telling buyers, in a helpful and regretful way, that plates made by the new heated method looked very fast in the first week, but that the heat left the gelatin unstable, and such plates went off in the box. He said it to Mrs. Kite in Villa Street. He said it in the smoking room of a photographic society meeting in Colmore Row on the 25th of April in front of 19 men, and then said the rest of it, which was that he would be glad to see the question settled publicly, with plates out of store, and that any maker confident of their goods could hardly object. Charles Ruddock, 52, who had a studio in a walled yard off Newhall Street and no interest in either side of it, offered the yard in his own hands. Isaac Fenner brought Ruth the news himself and did not tell her what to do. She sat with it 2 days and was ill with it. Everything she owned stood in that building. She had 5 people on wages, and a public failure in front of buyers would finish her inside a week and follow her into any other work in the trade. She wrote a letter refusing and carried it in her pocket for a night and a morning. What decided it was the shelf. 61 control plates in date order, 1 out of every batch since December, unsold, wrapped, labeled in Eliza's hand. Some were 18 weeks old. Nobody had asked her to keep them. She kept them because a thing you cannot find twice never happened, and because it cost 1 plate in 100 unsettled arguments before they started. She took 3 off that shelf and tested them on the yard wall on the 28th of April, and the oldest, coated on the 21st of December, gave her the wall and the doorway with the drop shutter, with no more fog on it than it had been born with. She wrote to Ruddock that night and accepted. The 9th of May was bright and still, and there were 14 people in the yard off Newhall Street by 10 in the morning. Ruddock ran all of it, and he ran it the way a careful man runs a thing he does not want to be blamed for afterward. 2 cameras of the same maker on stands 4 feet apart, both fitted with portrait lenses of the same pattern, both stopped alike, both carrying plain drop shutters cut from one board by his own carpenter that morning, and released by 2 boys of the same age on boxes of the same height. The rail was whitewashed, 20 inches high, set across the middle of the yard where the light fell full on the far wall. The plates came out of 2 sealed boxes. Ruth's were control plates coated between the 21st of December and the 18th of March, the oldest 19 weeks in store. Harcourt's came from his Manchester house out of a dealer's stock in Birmingham. Ruddock had a man draw them in pairs by lot and loaded the dark slides himself, and the boys were not told which camera held what. The horse was a bay mare named Juno, 16 years old, belonging to a carrier in Constitution Hill, ridden by a breaker called Tom Yardley, 39, who was paid 5 shillings for the morning and had put her over that rail 11 times before a camera was loaded. They made 6 passes. Yardley brought her across the yard at a canter, took the rail, went out at the gate end, and both shutters dropped together at a shout. After each pass, the slides went in and the next pair came out, and nobody was allowed to say what they had or had not seen. Then everybody stood in that yard for 50 minutes while Ruddock developed 12 plates. Harcourt stood by the gate with his back against the wall in a good coat and did not look at Ruth once. Ruth stood with Moll and Eliza by the water butt, and Moll talked the whole 50 minutes about a dog her brother had owned in Wednesbury, and Ruth heard about a fifth of it. Ruddock brought the negatives out wet, in pairs, and stood them on a board against the north wall, so the light came through them evenly and made the buyers come to the board instead of carrying the glass about. On the first pair, one negative showed the mare above the rail as a long smear, the head in 2 places, the forelegs gone into gray, and the whitewash rail underneath her clean and sharp. That was Harcourt's. The other showed her in the air with her forelegs folded and her ears forward and every hair of the mane separate and a fly on her shoulder and the shadow of the fly on the wall behind. The second pair was the same, and so was the third. On the fourth, Ruth's plate was a little soft along the hindquarters because the boy on the box had been slow, and Ruddock said so out loud and wrote it down, and that one admitted fault did more for her than the 3 clean plates before it. The fifth and the sixth went as the first had gone. 2 buyers worked through the negatives with a magnifier against the north wall for the best part of half an hour. One was a man named Hollis, from a warehouse in Sheffield, the same house that had given Harcourt the winter order he ruined. He asked how old the plates were, and she gave him the dates out of the book. Then he asked what would happen if he sent a man down to Hockley on any Tuesday he chose to watch a batch made from the glass up. Ruth said the man could come on whatever day he liked and stand wherever he wanted, and that she would have his dinner sent in. Harcourt came off the wall while the negatives were still on the board. He stopped and looked a while at the fourth pair, the one with the fault in it, and then he walked out through the gate and up Newhall Street. And that was the last time Ruth Mercer stood in a yard with him. Hollis and Company signed on the 16th of May for 40 dozen assorted quarter plates and half plates over 2 months, at 9 shillings the dozen for the half and 5 and 6 for the quarter, 18 pounds and a little over. 3 Birmingham studios placed repeat orders in the same fortnight, and Isaac Fenner took 6 dozen a month and told everyone who came into his rooms where he got them because he had tested them himself and could say so. The Manchester house withdrew the claim about heated plates going off in store. They did it in one line at the foot of a trade circular, in small type, without using his name or hers. Ruth paid Moll Hales, Bridget Nolan, Eliza Darby, and Alfred Tanner on the Friday, in coin, out of the tin, and entered the sums in the receipt book. Then she filled in her own line for the first time since February, at 15 shillings a week, and paid herself last because there was an order for 144 plates on the bench, and she wanted the silver for it. A signwriter did the front in June for 11 shillings. Mercer Photographic Plate Works, Hockley, Birmingham. The boxes went out in black paper with the same words on the label and a space at the bottom left blank on purpose, and Ruth stamped the batch number into that space herself, 1 box at a time, with the small brass stamp her father had numbered his crates with on the tail of a cart outside Dudley. When Annie Loach, 17, came in on her first morning in July and asked why every box had to be marked when they were all the same, Ruth told her what she had been told. Number everything. A thing you cannot find twice never happened. The horse negative stayed in the packing room, wrapped in black paper on the shelf with the control plates, because it was evidence, and she kept her evidence. Above it, she hung a photograph Isaac Fenner made in the yard that summer of 5 people and a boy against the lime-washed wall in their aprons, taken on a Mercer plate at a 50th part of a second. Everybody in it is sharp, including Alfred, who could not keep still. Ruth Mercer was 26 by then. In November, she had been put out of a locked yard with 11 pounds, 2 shillings owing to her, a brass stamp in her pocket, and a building that 4 men in good coats had been in a hurry to be rid of. Of all the things those 11 pounds might have bought her, none would have paid the way that building did, and it paid 4 other people first.